Did you know the average human life lasts about 4,000 weeks? I recently finished reading this book by Burkman, which is essentially dismantling the myth of productivity. If you're the sort of person that reads books about productivity, watches videos about productivity, and listens to podcasts about productivity, this will hurt. So essentially, in this book, the author explains that in our very limited and finite amount of time, which is the 4,000 weeks, trying to achieve every possible goal and task and making a dent in history is very, very unlikely. Instead, coming to the realization that our time is limited and we can only do so much serves to free us and keeps us in focus on what's important, to actually do the things that matter, like spending time with our family, like looking after our health, like reading. But having that realization keeps us focused instead of trying to do every single thing and becoming overwhelmed. So here's 5 take-home points from the book. 1 is a very practical point of how to try and suppress your desire to do everything, is to have 2 to-do lists. One is open and one is closed. So the open list, everything can go on that list. All the tasks, all the goals, all what you think of can go on that list. But then there is that closed list where you've got a limited number of tasks that can go on. So it's a number that you decide. Let's say 5, for example. So you pick out of the open list the 5 most important tasks to put on the closed list. And you are not allowed to move anything else from the open list until you've completed one of the closed tasks. Once you've closed one, you can move one, and so on. And that serves, again, to keep you focused. I'm personally guilty of having multiple to-do lists, some on paper, some in notebooks, some on note-taking apps, and the list goes on. Having one closed list with a limited number of tasks will keep you always focused. Okay? Next, avoid multitasking. So I can shamefully say that I've got over 60 tabs open on my Google Chrome on my phone. So I've had that number for probably months now, and thinking that I can do all these things and look at all these things and too overwhelming to look at. Limit your overwhelm. Limit the number of things you're doing. Focus on one project at a time. Don't move away from that project until it's done, and then move on to the next. That way, you have your undivided attention to just one thing you're likely to do very well, as opposed to trying to focus on 10 things at the same time. Number 3 is not only keep a list of the things you need to do, or the list of the things you haven't done, but also keep a list of the things you have done and you have achieved, no matter how little they are. And make that the have done list. And you can always look at it, you can always celebrate the small wins in your day, because we are very good at thinking of the things we haven't done, but we never think of the things we have done. So if we can keep that record, we'll always be motivated, we'll always be encouraged to carry on. Number 4 is choose boring. And I really like this, being someone who gets easily distracted by the newest note-taking app or the newest file management app or whatever. So if you're like me, you'll have 4 or 5 note-taking apps, a few cloud storage platforms, and so on. But what the author is suggesting is to keep all this to the very minimal, so that you're less distracted by technology. Because yes, technology does help, and yes, these things do help us take notes and organize our files and organize our tasks. But if you have multiple programs for achieving the same thing, which one are you going to use? You're going to forget things, and you'll not be able to go back to where you started or where you left. So yes, you can try different things, but choose and limit yourself and stick to your choice, and that way you're keeping your tech boring so you can actually achieve. Finally, invest in other people, and that's a really important thing. Like we said, realizing that we have a finite amount of time, which is not being grim or being negative, but just realizing that we can't achieve every possible goal we have, makes us focus on what matters. Focus on our family, focus on our friends, invest in those relationships, be curious, be present. So putting our phones down, putting our social media out of sight so we can focus on these things that matter. What do I think of the book? I think it's really interesting. It comes up with interesting ideas. I certainly am a person who's always driven to kind of look for new goals and try and achieve as much as possible, and that sets me back. So I think there is a balance between keeping your ambitions and being motivated to do things, but also trying to realize and be realistic about how much you can achieve and how much time you have, and how what your resources are within your duties and responsibilities. So yes, keep going, have goals, but try and be realistic and try and be disciplined. The book wasn't the easiest read. It was a bit too philosophical for my liking. I think the last bit with his few practical points at the end was very nice and easy to read, and in fact, in less than 30 minutes you can get the gist of the whole book from just reading this. But certainly an interesting book. I'd rate it at 3.5 stars out of 5, and I'd certainly recommend reading it if you're into that sort of philosophical thinking. If not, and you can just listen to this summary or find a summary somewhere else. And I hope you've enjoyed this episode. See you later.